Hey guys, it's Damien here, and it's honestly been a really long time since I've made a video about converting my motorcycle to electric, and I actually ended up pushing it off for quite a bit of time because I wanted to do some more research in how to properly complete this with all the electronics that are going on. And then things just started to pop up, and I never ended up spending much time on it, which is why I ended up spending a ton of my time 3D printing my RC helicopter. If you guys haven't seen that, a lot of the videos that I've made on that. But now I'm trying to switch gear, and I think it would be best to actually just finally complete this motorcycle, get it riding, and get these videos out for you guys. So one of the items that I had to tackle for this motorcycle is to figure out the proper way to mount the bottom plate that will be holding the batteries onto the motorcycle. So there were multiple options that I was able to choose from. There were jack nuts, well nuts, rivet nuts, and they were all decent options, but I was afraid of using jack nuts just because when you put them into this motorcycle frame, and if something were to happen, there looked like there was a possible chance of the jack nut breaking internally, and then I would have there didn't seem to have much support between the through hole and where the threads the threaded hole where the screw was going through. So I ended up scrapping that idea. And then the more I looked into this frame, I almost considered well nuts, which is pretty much a rubber surrounded rivet nut, essentially, where you are able to put it into the frame and it kind of starts to bulge on the inside. It would bulge on the inside of the frame, and that's what would hold the screw in with the right angle bracket that I have underneath the battery plate. But the well nuts ended up needing a lot more, a bigger diameter for the hole, the through hole to put the well nut in. So I didn't think that was a viable option. So what I ended up going with is the rivet nuts. Now, rivet nuts are something that are very useful for metal components. Now, before I would jump into using rivet nuts on the bottom side of the frame here, I wasn't too experienced in using rivet nuts. So the first thing I ended up doing is I ended up using these metal mending plates that I found laying around, and what I ended up doing is I ended up using my vice clamp, and I ended up using a 19/64 of an inch drill because it had to diameter drill because it had to be a certain diameter for the rivet nut to go through, and the rivet nut that I was going with is a quarter 20. So I ended up, and this was actually really late at night, so I ended up using my table vise to drill the hole. And I know you're technically supposed to use a smaller drill bit and then kind of expand on that. It was really late at night, so I just wanted to get it over with, and I just used the 19/64 of an inch drill bit to just drill the mending plate. And then from there I ended up trying to do the DIY version of installing the rivet onto this mending plate. And it was quite difficult because I didn't have any way to fix the vise. I didn't have a good way to hold on to everything because things were moving around. So I ended up using this one of the big metal poles in my basement to kind of fixate it. And there's two ways to install a rivet nut using the DIY version, using two wrenches, a wrench, and a socket wrench, pretty much what you prefer. The first version is holding the bolt on the backside while tightening up the nut that's next to or butted up against the plate where the rivet nut is. And while you're tightening up that bolt, you're pretty much unscrewing that bolt and compressing that nut to be able to install that nut properly into that metal plate. The second version, you are pretty much using slightly oversized nuts that are used pretty much like a spacer in a way, where you're holding the nut on the front end, but this time you're tightening up the bolt while making that nut install into that plate and getting it compressed to where you need it to be. And so unfortunately, when I did this exercise, I managed to press fit the washer into the rivet nut, which didn't end up the way I was hoping for. So that's kind of when I realized that, the DIY version works if you really have done it before and you've had experience. But for me, I figured for something like this, I really don't want to mess anything up. So I just ended up buying a rivet tool. Now, the rivet tool that I bought was called the Next Tack. It's pretty much a rivet gun, and it came with multiple mandrels and multiple size rivet nuts. So now, the next time I was actually going to be practicing riveting a 1/4-20 rivet nut, I ended up using a brand new mending brace or a metal plate. But this time I wanted a better way to drill out the hole using a drill press by 3D printing a block that would slide in that plate to fixate it into the vise, and then I was able to then drill out the hole. And a funny story is when I was drilling out that hole, the plate ended up getting so hot that for the first, I don't know, 10-30 seconds of post drilling, I was actually having a really hard time taking out that plate because the plastic was starting to deform a little bit. But eventually, I was able to get that out. And during the time I was actually using that drill press, I made sure to drill out 2 holes just in case I messed up the first time. So now with both holes drilled out in this mending brace, I actually ended up clamping that plate back onto the vise again, and this time I used the Next Tack tool to be able to practice and install the rivet into that plate. And believe it or not, it actually ended up being much, much better. It was a lot easier after installing the mandrel and setting it all up, because all you have to do is install the mandrel, put the rivet nut, thread the rivet nut into the mandrel, and then you're just making sure it's seated, and then you're just clamping down with the rivet gun. And then sure enough, the rivet actually ended up turning out much better than the DIY version. Of course, with the DIY version, you actually have to make sure that everything is flush, nothing is moving, and you're pretty much extremely sturdy when you're installing that rivet nut. But with the rivet gun, it was fairly simple. It was very easy setup, and it made me pretty much confident enough to start installing it onto the motorcycle. So now that that was done, I ended up drilling out 19/64 inch holes into the motorcycle so that I could install rivet nuts on both ends. But instead of using a 1/4-20, I decided to go with M5s. And with the set, you actually end up getting standard sets and a metric set. I ended up going with M5 rivet nuts because they were still strong enough to what they were intended to do, and that was just to hold the batteries on the battery plate. So that's what I ended up going with. And since, like I mentioned before, the square tubing on this motorcycle is quite thin, so I wanted to just save some space so I didn't ruin the strength of the square tubing. Not that I would, but just something to think about. Now, during the install, I realized that when I was installing the mandrel, I actually ended up installing the mandrel a little too tight on the rivet gun, and that's when I wasn't able to compress the rivet gun with its full range, because after I tried to install the rivet gun, it was not super tight or seated up against the square tubing. Once I realized that I had to back off the mandrel on the rivet gun, it gave me a larger range of motion for the rivet gun, which ended up seating that rivet nut into the square tubing substantially better. Here's a quick sneak peek of the batteries placed onto the bottom plate. So there will definitely be more videos coming on this electric motorcycle. I hope you guys enjoyed my journey of just deciding on what to use to mount this battery plate onto the motorcycle. So, like I said before, more videos are coming. I'm super excited to get this motorcycle up and running and plugged in and on the road. So hopefully we could get this series closed out and finished for you guys. And as always, thanks for watching. If you guys like this type of content, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Guys, one last thing. If you guys are interested in me doing a quick review and giving you guys my comments and thoughts on the Rivet gun I had recently purchased for this motorcycle, just put a comment down below. I'll make a dedicated video on that Rivet gun. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.